Thanks for being here. My name is Annie Schneider. I come from France. This was the good time I was living in southern France, which is the context in which I made the experiment I'm about to show. Now I'm working in Paris, so that's not the same kind of environment. But I currently work for the French government. We try to modernize it from the inside, and I try to apply the experiment that I'm presenting now. So the work I'm about to present was done in my previous startup over about 18 months, and during part of my curriculum as a social and cognitive anthropology master's thesis that I was doing during the evenings and weekends, and during the day I was working at a startup where we were developing a web application for surgery clinics. So that was a pretty constrained environment because that means that you have to handle regulations, you have difficult access to the market, we were also dependent on a single investor. So we had quite a lot of constraints, and we were a team of 3 to 5 people. So that could be one of the questions, how to expand this experiment. I'm not pretending at the moment that it would be a perfect fit for all the environments, but at least that's what we did. We relied quite heavily on artifacts to face the different constraints that we were to work with. And there was one artifact in particular that helped us not only survive the changing conditions, but also strive in this very changing environment by enabling very fast learning and very fast adaptation. And this is the guide board. So you can notice its physical placement on the wall, and it's meaningful. We can get back to it later, if so interest. But first of all, I'll present how it actually works. So at the end of each retrospective, every time the team comes together to reflect and adjust its behavior, the team creates what we call a guide ticket for every rule that it decides to follow to reinforce its strengths and decrease the impact of its weaknesses. So it's an artifact that is a retrospective outcome, but that will allow you to follow the evolution of your conclusions over time. So the first guides that are created in this way are pretty trivial. For example, in French here we said no task that has more than a complexity estimated at more than 10 story points in the background. This is we should do the stand-up at 9:15 in the morning. This is we should eat at noon. So this is pretty trivial, but this is actually the real questions that your team faces when it comes together for the first time. And why, during the first retrospective, during the first sprint, number one, why did we have to, as a retrospective conclusion, that we had to eat at noon? Well, just because otherwise we were wasting 20 minutes looking at each other, like, is he about to go eating? Or should I work? Should I not work? Should I start something new? And we identified this as one of the most important sources of waste. At the beginning, that's indeed one important source of waste. So, at the beginning, it's mostly about showing the medium to long-term decisions that the team takes regarding its behavior. However, of course, culture is mostly emergent, and both internal and external constraints can make you change these decisions. So, guides are not absolute. They can become obsolete, and that's what we see here in blue. These are guides that were closed. For example, here, we decided on sprint number 2 that we should have sprints of 2 weeks. And on sprint 34, we decided that no, that was not anymore the right iteration size. Why don't we simply remove the guides? Because closing a guide is a process. It's not simply a decision. First of all, what happens is that in a retrospective, the team realizes that it was not really able to follow one of the rules, one of the guides it had edicted for itself during one of the previous iterations. And this is spotted in the retrospective. People say, yeah, you know, we really said this some time ago, and I feel like we didn't make it. And if the team agrees that they didn't really make it, then the artifact is updated to reflect this state of the system. So on the lowest line of the guideboard, there's endangered, a warning line. This is simply where you put stuff that you were not really able to observe, and you don't say anything else. And what's pretty interesting is, for example, here we had a hard time keeping our stand-up under 6 minutes, and that was one of the first rules we addicted. It was maybe in sprint 2 or 3, and on sprint 20 we realized it was more like 10 or 15 minutes. Very annoying. And we just take this ticket and put it in the endangered row, and that's all. No need to discuss it for 2 hours. And what's very interesting is that simply by having this rule in the artifact, then the team adjusts its behavior accordingly. Now it's put forward, it's visible. And the second effect is that at the end of the iteration, where the guys were put in the endangered row, it's pretty easy to see, do you have the same results as before? Do you feel like you still weren't able to properly follow this rule? If yes, then automatically the guide will be closed. We put these blue stickers on them, we write the iteration number at which it was closed. On the other side of the sticky note, we also write a short sentence explaining why we believe we weren't able to follow this guide, and we put it back in place. So we do measure the time between the addiction of the rule and its closure. This allows us to check that we are not simply creating rules and not able to follow them at all, like on the next iteration, which would mean that we're not seriously taking the retrospective exercise. We're not really thinking long term. And we also write down the reasons why we closed them, because one thing that most teams encounter, if they are not following their outcomes over time, is that there's a conclusion, and 3 months later, there's a new solution that comes up, and one of the team members says, you know, I really think that 3 months ago, we had the same discussion, and we did this, and it didn't work, but now I can't remember why. And that's precisely what we're solving here. And actually the sentence that we write on the backside of the sticky note is not that important. We very rarely have to refer to it, because by having made tangible the conclusions and the closures and the index, that's usually enough for the team members to remember the story. This is also why we did drawings. It looks like it's fun, but actually this is one of the most important tricks. At first, the first times I just did drawings because I found it fun and I wanted it to be fun for my team. At some point, we decided that drawings were not that important. Actually, we didn't decide anything, we just stopped doing them because it was not important. And after 6 to 7 iterations, we had all this wall with only text, and nobody knew what was in the conclusions. Nobody remembered what these guys were about. So we started doing the drawings again, and we realized 2 things. The first was that stickies with drawings we actually remembered, because just by looking at them, yeah, that was this one. And the second thing, I think we have to go, I don't know if you see it here, maybe it was a bit afterwards. We had one guide, that I will show later, that stated the illustration, the drawing, defines the rule. Because the second point is that agreeing on a drawing leads to a much deeper debate than agreeing on a sentence. When you have people just finding which wording to use, they just want to get rid of it. They just want to have 2 keywords and they believe that it's enough. But if you start with the drawing, you realize that while you were using the same words, nobody had the same idea. And putting it graphically makes it much more expensive. Of course, we're not only modeling just for the pleasure of modeling and showing things. We actually measured this outcome, and we were able to see how efficient it was just by counting how many times debates were stopped at their very beginning just by showing one of the guides. So it was not something like, no, stop talking. It's just that, just like stories, you probably know this characterization of stories as a reminder to have a discussion. Well, guides are a reminder that the discussion has been had. And so there's no debate. If one of the team members just tells, you know, I really think we had this discussion 2 weeks ago, and actually that was the conclusion. People stop talking, but it's not because they were told to shut up. It's just because, yeah, actually we had this discussion, and now I remember the conclusion. So there's no need to have this discussion once again. So, less debate, easier decision making without frustration. And over time, of course, guides become more and more specific. They are much less trivial than before. For example, here, we decided that we should debrief every user testing session, not something that you may define as a rule on your first iteration. And then we reached the moment where we actually had meta rules. Rules, guides for updating the guide board. This is the time where we added this endangered row. We did not start with it. We just wanted to show the outcomes. But after 15 iterations, we realized, well, there's no way to know what we're doing right, what we're following, and what we're not. This is how the guide board came to be. This is how we decided that we should evolve the rules if we're not able to follow them. So some guides can actually change how the guide board itself works. Other teams used similar artifacts. After I started presenting this and discussing it, I actually had a few people telling me, yeah, we're doing something quite like that. So this is another team. They were doing this before I presented the guide board. Afterwards, they slightly changed the representation. And what was very interesting is that I had a few people telling me, this didn't work for us. And this guy told me this actually worked for him quite well. And what do you see? Well, you see a very short definition, and you see a drawing. And they have put this all over their place. So I think there are a few basic principles that make this work better over time. And well, this is an experience report, not a research paper, so I won't go too far in the neuroscience and the reasons why I think this works. But there's actually pretty strong evidence for why this works better with drawings. And I can sum it up simply by saying, well, you can encode much more information on a sticky note with drawings than with words. And then there's all this thing about the physical memory and stuff. So the guide board is an idea, the idea of showing, of making tangible your retrospective outcomes, but it's also a set of constraints on the representation. It's also part of the work. And finally, one very important word of warning. The main condition for this artifact to be efficient, to have any effect at all, is that the team owns this artifact. This is by no means a driving wheel for some manager to say, hey, I really want you to do this, now do it. This won't work. This will cause frustration, this will cause anger, but most of all, this won't work at all. It simply works because the team agreed on something. Thanks for your attention.
In your pictures, the drawings looked actually quite nice. So, how many iterations of the drawings, so how many post-it notes gets to trust before you get like right kind of drawing?
Very good question. Very good question. So, at the beginning, the first ones I just did. So, one bosset. Then, when we realized it was important, it was maybe 2 bossets. And then, after we dictated the guide that the illustration should define the rule, that was more like 6 or 7. So maybe 10 to 15 minutes to define a guide. But also something else changed. Rather than simply drawing or writing down the outcome of the retrospective, this actually became quite quickly what we did during the retrospective. So we had some issue coming up. We would quickly decide, do you think this is something that we can solve with a one-off solution, or do you have an idea on how we could do it? If yes, then we would not draw. But then if that felt like a long-term outcome, then we knew it would go on the guide board. And we would start very quickly, starting the drawing. So more post-its, but it would also mediate the discussion. So I think it would actually be more efficient than simply writing down the outcomes and having had an unmediated debate.
People were very reticent at the beginning to speak. Did you find that this helped people, bring people out and get them to talk? And also, so the second question, you only did the you only had like a retrospective at the end of the sprint, and during the sprint, did you find that you were updating things as well on the guide board?
Okay, so no, we were not updating during the sprint, and for a reason we didn't do continuous retrospectives. We wanted this. We were following the iteration. So this is the time where the team comes together. I think there's also value in taking a real time of production to actually do the retrospective. So that's the answer. And
the first question was about, did it help bring people out to speak?
I wouldn't be able to answer this honestly, because the team members already somehow knew each other beforehand. And there was a lot of trust very soon. Everyone was aligned on the goal of having a continuously improving production system. So I don't know how this would work as a facilitation artifact. I think one of the prerequisites is having a lot of trust. And I don't know if it could help trust emerge or not. But if you do, try, let me know.